Hello and welcome to Chapter 7, Voting on Elections from the American Government 3rd edition textbook of Open Stax. So we're going to be talking about voting on elections and how it serves its purposes here in the United States and how it's changed over time and how voter turnout is different amongst different age groups, the candidates going for election. And so you can see here back in 2019, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, America's mayor, or something of that sort. He had a nickname for himself. He was running for office, and of course he didn't win. And now he's the current, as of this recording, the Secretary of Transportation. So he had a pretty impressive resume for being a mayor of a town in Indiana, and he really made some headways in the election. But of course he is now under the Secretary of Transportation. State and local control of elections. So each individual state controls the state and local elections. So state and local local elections means like the governor of the state, city council or aldermen as this at the local level, mayors, state representatives, state governors, local judges, sheriffs. So those are controlled by within the state. Of course, the federal government handles those for federal offices. So state offices supervise and coordinate the efforts of county and municipal elections, and of course oversee individual precincts, and of course the early voting process. And that's why different states have some different rules when it comes to absentee ballots or early voting. So there's just every state has its own rules regarding that. So there's no consistency amongst all the states, all the 50 states in the union when it comes to state and local elections. So of course you can see here one of the most famous moments in American history is the Voting Rights Act, signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson, as you can see here on the left-hand side, and one of the major figures from the Civil Rights Movement, Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks as well, being there when that was signed. So of course here in the United States, when you move, or when you can register to vote online, or when you get your driver's license, they ask you, you register to vote, do you want to? And of course, when you move to a new address, you should, change your voting registration as well, update your address, because that will determine where your voting location will be. So, so of course you can complete that in the Department of Motor Vehicles, the DMV, or of course you can also do it online. State and citizens' interest in the electoral process. Elections protect integrity, right? So we want to make sure that there are no we want to make sure that people's voting is protected. We want to make sure that's private. There's no fraud. People aren't voting for other people. And so, of course, on National Voter Registration Day, we have big campaigns out there to get people to vote, especially the new folks. So there's a big drive to get 18-year-olds, because in the United States, if you're 18 and, of course, you're a U.S. citizen, you can register to vote. And also recently, U.S. citizens, that's another major group as well that try to get them to register. So once somebody becomes a U.S. citizen, we try to get them to, and they're 18 and older, of course, they try to get them to register to vote, because they are new groups of people who can vote. You can see here Stacey Abrams on the left-hand side in picture A, big proponent of getting people registered to vote. So there are various ways to measure voter turnout, and so voter turnout is the people who actually go out and vote. And you can see here from the total population, right? So that's the total population in the United States, and the number has probably increased as of this recording. So voting age population, right? Those who are 18 and above, and of course voting eligible population, those who are U.S. citizens. And don't have a federal record, federal felony, and of course those who are registered to vote keeps doing, and those who vote in the election. As you can see here from the total population, of course, let's just take it more for the voter eligible, right? Because you can have a voting age, but maybe you are a green card holder, or you're not a U.S. citizen, then of course that you can't penalize you for that. But if you are a voter eligible, look at the difference between voting eligible and those who actually turn out to vote, right? And so the United States has a pretty low voter turnout rate compared to other countries in the world. So disenfranchisement. So over the years, one of the reasons why back in the 1800s, why voter registration was low, voter participation, voter turnout was low, was because first of all, African Americans, even after the Civil War, they were given. Of course, remember we talked about the Civil Rights Amendments. They were still disenfranchised to vote. They have poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, right? Grandfather clauses. If your grandfather didn't vote, then you can't vote. Poll tax, you had to pay a poll tax at that time, probably $1. And of course, literacy tests, if you can read or write, or they would test you that. And of course, those laws were up there for a very, very long time. And of course, when Congress passed the 1965 Voting Rights Act, you cannot do such poll tax and literacy test and grandfather clauses. And so, of course, you can't do any discrimination laws and grandfather clauses. So voter registration, the Constitution prohibits the exclusion of voters based on race, sex, or age, as long as you're 18 years and older. And of course, various federal laws prevent the use of discrimination, election, and voter registration practices. So again, each state determines its own voter registration requirements, although they have to comply with the federal governor. So basically, almost every state, as long as you're 18 and above and U.S. citizen, you can register to vote. And of course, you have to, get those numbers up. We try to get those numbers up. You see here the age differences between voter registered and voting age groups. So you can see here the individuals who are 18 and between the ages of 18 and 24 compared to those of 65 and 74. You can see here the ones who are registered and ones who actually vote. You can see here the older folks, the 65 and older, actually vote higher and are registered to vote higher. That's why politicians always go out and, favor those who are much older because they're the ones who higher vote, prior to President Obama, a lot of elected officials, especially at the federal level when they're running for president, really didn't pay much attention to the college students because, as you can see here, they just had a low voter turnout rate. They didn't register in high numbers as compared to older folks. But of course, President Obama changed that perspective. It really changed with him, and he started to really make an impact on college students to get them to register to vote and actually come out to vote. Additional state voter registration requirements. So some states impose additional limits and requirements. So court decisions have upheld the exclusion of incarcerated individuals with felony criminal act convictions, individuals who cannot prove their residency in the state with a valid state issue form of identification. They need a photo identification, who can't provide their age of citizenship, and residents who can't prove they live in a state or municipality. So again, and states, so again, the Constitution did not say, if you have a felony criminal conviction, you cannot vote. There's some states who have put that in place. And so, again, that's why there's no consistency with the 50 unions about voter registration. Of course, everyone has consistency with 18 years and older and U.S. citizen, but there are some states that have additional requirements. Some states, require you to show your state issued government ID. So that's the thing with the United States. The voter registration process again differs from state to state. Federal laws force states to offer voter registration opportunities. So of course, the National Voter Registration Act requires states to add voter registration to government applications. So again, when you get your driver's license or you go to the DMV to renew your driver's license, they ask you, are you registered to vote or not? You can do it right there. And so again, and then of course, some states offer online registration or by mail, right? So Oregon automatically enrolls its voting eligible citizens. So voter turnout. Voter turnout is, of course, as we showed in the previous slide, a few slides ago, is calculated by ballots made. So who came out to actually turn out to vote. So you can see here voting rates over time change from the voting age population. So again here, 18 and 24, the red line here at the very bottom, you can see here it dwindles down. People who are much older, 45 and older, tend to have a pretty high of voter turnout. And so, of course, there are influences on voter turnout. There are various reasons why older folks are likely to turn out to vote, right? And so again, it just really has to depend on the things like frequency of moving, levels of education, lower tax and regulatory burdens, um, and so lack of engagement with government. So young people, right, 18 to 25-year-olds, usually in the United States, most of them are in college. So most of them go to college in a different state that they're not registered to vote. So they forget maybe to turn in their absentee ballot, or to get their mail-in ballot in the mail so they can turn that in. Maybe just they don't care about it at the moment. Sometimes your level of education has to do with it. So the higher your education levels are, the more likely you are to turn out to vote. Or especially if issues are pertaining to you, you have a likely higher rate to turn out to vote. So and again, this is a question to ask you as a college student. What challenges do you face regarding with regards to voter registration? As a college student, is it difficult? Do you find it hard to register to vote? Why is that so? Just think about that for a minute, then write it down or think about it and speak it amongst yourselves. So you can see here, union members, get out the vote, right? So of course, President Obama was really hands forward in using social media to get people out to register to vote. So likely voters, in addition to advanced age, people with higher levels of income and wealth in education are more likely to vote than non. Race also determines a factor. So Caucasians are more likely to vote than Asian Americans, African Americans, and Hispanics. Political parties and campaigners target likely voters, especially those who vote regularly. Again, this is the reason why a lot of politicians focus on those who are more likely to vote, like the 45 or 65 and older, than they are to target the 18 to 25-year-olds, because they just look at the data and they want to spend their time and resources on people who are more likely to vote than non-voters, because usually campaigns are tight on money, so they need to focus on who is going to come out and vote. So again, why is there a low voter turnout rate? Here in the United States, we do have a low voter turnout compared to other democracy countries. Some factors for not voting is too busy. People just don't have the time to vote. It is on a Tuesday. Federal elections are on a Tuesday, and usually federal and local elections are on a Tuesday. So Tuesday, most people are working. They just don't have time to wait out in line for hours, sometimes on end, to register to vote. So they're too busy. They don't have childcare, family care to take care of the little ones while they go out and vote. There's some work conflicts. They work all day, maybe 12-hour shifts. There's no transportation. Usually some voting locations are far out and they just can't get there. They don't have a vehicle, or the public transportation does not meet there. They don't know where to vote. They lose their registration card. They can't find a location where to vote. The technology is too difficult to use, the voting technology. Voter laws, again, identification requirements. Maybe they don't have a state issued government ID and therefore they can't vote. They can care less about the candidates. They don't know enough about the candidates. They don't interest them. And of course, there's too much voting going on, so they just don't care about it. Again, sometimes some lines are extremely long, and and people are just not going to have the time or the capacity to vote. Some jobs probably won't even let you go out, and like if you say, "Hey, boss, can I go vote?" They probably say, "Well, you got to work for it first." And some polls close right, early, maybe 5 or 6 o'clock, depending on the location site. And of course, imagine you work from 9 to 5. When are you gonna go vote? Especially if you have little ones to go take to school. Yeah, voting locations open early, around 6 or 7 a.m. And that's if they don't have any issues. Imagine they have, your voting location has issues with its computers and they can't get them up and running by 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. And you got to go to work. I recall when I go and vote, people are in a rush. They're like, well, I got to get vote real quick because I got to go to work. My boss is waiting for me. I got to get into work. So, if the voting machines were taking forever or the line was taking forever, they just leave. Like, you know what? Forget it. The election cycle for federal offices takes several months to complete. So you get nominated, party determines your candidates, so you get nomination. The primary campaigns is when candidates debate one another, hold meetings, run campaign ads. The primaries and caucuses, of course, who is going to be the political party's candidate. You have conventions to formally nominate the general election campaign. Then, of course, election date is early November. And of course, some states have early voting, and of course, electoral college voting for presidential elections only. So the for example, the presidential election cycle usually runs about 2 years. So if you're going to run for office, if you're going to run for the U.S. presidency, let's say for example in 2024, usually the cycle starts now. You need to go and start campaigning in 2022. It takes about 2 years to run your election up and running, if you're going to run a successful campaign. Primaries, caucuses, and conventions. So let's take a deeper dive into the primaries. So the primaries look and feel like a general election, but of course, this is only to represent the party in the ballot. So the primaries is, let's look at the Democrat and Republican primaries. So on the Republican side, you may have 5 candidates running for the U.S. presidency, and they're trying to make sure they're the candidate who's going to represent the party in the general election cycle. So they're trying to run for in that primary. So in closed primary, states must indicate, the voters must indicate a political party in order to receive their ballot. In open primary states, voters may choose the party primary in which they vote. Caucuses, states use small informal meetings to determine the voter preference. So in caucuses, like Iowa, for example, is a state that has a caucus. They do so in informal meetings, instead of having a ballot. Of course, there. So of course, and then of course, in the general elections at their convention, they select who's going to be. But by the time we get to the conventions now, in today's age, you already know who's going to represent, who the individual is going to represent them in the primary, in the general election. The Electoral College, probably now one of a very controversial ways of electing the president. So the Electoral College actually votes for the president of the United States. And so, yes, individuals do elect the president. However, we do have an electoral college here in the United States, the only one in the entire country. So, of course, the electoral college comes in December after the general election, and of course, the number of electorals is apportioned by the states, matching their size of the congressional delegation. So, again, the Electoral College has 530 electors, 270 is needed to win the majority. So again, if you have 270 electoral votes, you win the majority and win the presidency. So again, what's the difference between the Electoral College and popular vote? And of course, it's a split. And of course, this is where over the last couple of years, presidential elections, it has come down to the Electoral College versus the popular vote. So splits typically occur because votes for the popular vote winner were not distributed amongst those with large numbers of electorals. And so again, there is something called the faithless electoral problem. It occurs when electoral disregards voter preferences. So usually the electoral usually favors those that the popular vote favored. But sometimes there's they go against the grain and go against the voter preference and elect whom they see fit for the presidency. So several states require electors to follow the state's popular vote in a winner-take-all system. So of course, we had here some individuals who did the faithless voter. So there has been some calls to abolish the electoral college. There should be total election by the direct from the voters and not from an electoral college. And of course, that would require a constitutional amendment. And that would be extremely difficult, almost near impossible. I don't want to say totally impossible, but near impossible, because small states and Republicans would be very highly unlikely to support such an amendment because it would affect their strategies, and they shifted the political power to the big states and at large coastal cities. Because you have to remember, big cities have a higher higher number of individuals, voters to turn out, and of course large coastal cities as well, compared to small states, rural areas, and the Republicans would not go for the Electoral College. Campaign finance. The Federal Election Commission controls and keeps public records of federal campaign donations. So when you donate to when you donate to an individual, running for public office directly to their campaign. By law, those have to be public records, and you can look online and see how much money a candidate has received in their campaign. Regulations limit the amounts individuals and organizations can donate. However, the Supreme Court, Citizens United, hold that political donations are a form of protected political speech. So PACs they are called super PACs, who can, raise unlimited amounts of money as long as they don't coordinate with the candidate's campaign. And so you can see here the contribution limits from the 2021-2022 federal elections. So, how much can you give directly to a candidate? You can see here how much you can do it. And so you have to really be careful how much money you give. And yes, they are strict with these laws. So just a review question, what can be done to increase the voter turnout in the United States? What ideas do you have? Now, remember, you have to be 18 years and older, and you have to be a U.S. citizen, right? So you can't say, well, let's lower the voting age. It's probably more than likely not going to happen. And the U.S. citizen law is not going to change. So aside from those factors, what are some ways that could be done to increase voter turnout? So you can see here some candidates at the time running for office. Here is the infamous coffin handbill. So back in the days, presidential elections were pretty brutal, much more than they are today, especially with their campaign styles. So voters in Michigan can use straight ticket voting. You select the top of the box, which gives a single party all the votes in the ballot. Direct democracy allows for policy initiatives to be decided by popular vote. Some states to incorporate the forms of that. Forms of direct democracy include ballot initiative, referendum, and recall. So states have recalls to remove a politician by the voters. So California is very well known for that. Referendum, a yes or no vote by citizens on a law or a candidate proposed by the state government. So there are referendums out there in ballots, and of course ballot initiative, a law or constitutional amendment proposed and passed by voters, reviewed by state courts. So initiative and popular referendum provisions allow citizens to place laws and amendments on the ballot. So you can see here that there are states who allow its citizens to place laws and amendments on the ballots. So you can see here states like Oklahoma allow for referendums and initiatives on both. And so again, the green ones, the pure green ones, and of course the red ones allow for none of it. You can see here, of course, federal voters consider proposed amendments that will allow doctors recommend to use marijuana for patient use. Voter rights restoration. And thank you for joining this chapter 7 on the American government textbook 3rd edition from Open Stax. Thank you.